My name is Elia Salles, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the DxHub management team. We are very delighted to have you today. So this masterclass is being organized within the framework of the DxHub European project and form part of a wider series of sessions aimed at building capacity and strengthening the innovation ecosystem that is being developed through the project. And to formally introduce our speaker and guide us into the session, I will now hand over to Isabel, who will present today's speaker. So thank you and have a great session.
Thank you very much, Elia. So yes, it's my pleasure actually to be here, and thank you, Sali, for again collaborating with us and for accepting this challenge and invitation and to join us in the second part of this masterclass. Sali is a researcher. Is an expert on global health, and she has more than 15 years of experience in fragile and low-income settings, especially focusing on health system, gender, and protection. She has experience, extensive experience on the subject of decolonizing evaluation methods. She's a researcher at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Sali, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Now it's okay. Now it's good.
I wonder if you can hear me.
Okay. Yeah. Now we can. Thank you.
Perfect. And can someone please confirm that you can see my screen as well?
Yes, it's good.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, and very happy to be back this year again, and very happy as well to see that you're exploring and expanding with this work, having two sessions this year and expanding beyond partnership. Today, I feel I would like to offer a little bit of discussion and interrogation of the appropriateness of the methods that we use in global health, and build a little bit about our understanding the status of our scholarship and where are the contested questions that we maybe need to explore more. Yeah. So I will start a little bit with the drivers for this work, so you would understand a little bit about the organizational context and why we would like to ask these questions, and a little bit of unpack some concepts about decoloniality and how they are different from commonly used and conflated terms such as EDI, the anti-racism, justice, and and how they are sometimes confused, and what that means when we started discussing methodologies, and explore a little bit epistemic justice, drawing on the work of Abimbola, and then interrogate the appropriateness of what we do. I would really like to hear more today, if that's possible, so please feel free to just ask questions, share with us your insights or tensions, and all sorts of reflections. This is an evolving area of literature and scholarship, and this is how we would like to have this discussion forward. And to start, I would like also to situate myself in this discussion and present who am I, as this really guides how we see the world, how we experience the world, and how we perceive issues such as knowledge, and whose knowledge is valid and whose knowledge is legitimate. And I'm Sali Hafez, and I'm from a woman. I go with she, her, and I'm from Alexandria, Egypt. And I've been a non-English native speaker. I've been mainly studying most of my life both in Arabic and in English, but that also shapes how we kind of understand and see and perceive knowledge. I've been also clinically trained and educated in institutions, both in low middle-income countries and high-income countries, and also worked before for the UN and the Red Cross, and that also shaped a lot of my perception of programs and program design and evaluations, and that also required me to stop and to try to kind of unlearn some of the things that were shaped by these institutions. Just a little bit of my journey. I would like also to draw a little bit about the institutional context at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and what are the drivers for this kind of work, and how we're trying to build the different areas of work here. Starting from with the Black Lives Matters movement, there were a lot of institutions in Europe and in the UK that they were trying to tackle a lot of institutional racism inside these institutions. And based on the work of some of the informal networks in the school, there was an independent review to address discrimination and racism and LSHTM. And at the same time, there was an historic research report about the colonial history of the school and how LSHTM was benefiting from the British Empire. In fact, it was an instrument to control the British economies, and how science and knowledge were used in that sense as a colonial instrument, So this is where we situate ourselves, in an institution that is deeply colonial, with a colonial root, but also with an understanding of knowledge and method that is very Western driven. There are some initiatives that have been done and some work and commitments by the school to address some of this history and the current, what they call it, colonial debris, how this colonial structures shape the current knowledge institutions and the way we perceive science. So there were some kind of informal initiatives, such as decolonizing global health and fair fighting against institutional racism. There are also some formal work, including the Equitable partnership team that developed Equipar tool to guide research groups and centers when they are developing research, equitable research, particularly with partners in low and middle income countries, and how that can be better work better together and deliver fair projects and fair science. There are also some center-led projects, such as the work of the Center for Humanitarian Crisis, developed a charter and implementation guide, how they want to see them working in teaching, in partnership, and in supervision. We published a paper on that, if you're interested to read more a little bit. Some of the interesting findings that some of the research agenda are unfortunately still developed in Keppel Street in London, and that would attribute it to multiple challenges, including how grants and funding has been structured and the power and the historical power that the institution holds. We still hold a lot of power in terms of funding, resource allocations, dictating the research questions, particularly when working with partners in humanitarian contexts. There was also a few other interesting themes in relation to how we see decolonization. While some define that as justice, some others define that as equity, some others define that as representation, particularly in terms of the teaching team and teaching staff. Others define that in relation to respect. That was particularly a view held by our partners in humanitarian fragile settings. And that was a very interesting starting point, and we will come back to that because we felt that this kind of diverse conceptualization needs to be further unpacked, and that's what we started to do in the next project. Among the other interesting findings is how there was a limited institutional appetite actually to do any change in relation to how the school works and the business model, because simply we profit from this racial capitalist system. However, there were individual pockets of change, some research projects, some research consortiums, and some centers who were actually keen not to be the lead, for example, in research applications and getting the highest amount of money in the grant, and kind of provide more to basically leave some power for the partners to work in that sense. We unpacked a lot of sectoral and structural challenges, particularly in relation to how humanitarianism has been designed in relation to white saviorism and in relation to the white savior complex, as the literature highlights, but also how that relates to the academic structure. All of probably many of us know about how we have to publish or perish. You have to get grants. You have to to do that, and that leaves very little room to challenge the existing system and existing structure, particularly for mid-career and junior staff who also suffer from precarious contracts, and they usually are the ones who pay the price for speaking and trying to challenge how the system is structured. But we also, on the good side, we identified the very good examples. Unfortunately, they were a little bit ad hoc, but they were really well acknowledged and well received by our partners in fragile settings, including having joint what do you call it, management approach, where each of the institutions would be leading the whole project for 6 months, and this is how we know everyone kind of shares decision making, having co-PIs, including from different, representing different institutions, having more fair authorship approach and authors writing for the peer-reviewed papers. In terms of the methods that we use, including being led by the perspectives of our partners, including the methods that should be used and the interrogation frameworks. But we also wanted to go back to the point about conceptualization, because that's really important. How do we actually define decolonizing global health? Is it like liberation? Is it more of better ways of doing things? Do we change everything? Do we burn the whole system and start from scratch, or do we enhance the system? All of these, this is really important point to start with, especially when we want to understand what that actually means when we're designing research, when we're trying to change the way we do research and evaluations. And with that, we hear, well, I'm sorry if this is very basic for some, but for me, for at least when I first started to explore that literature, I was really confused by a lot of terms, particularly the relation between colonization and coloniality, and what decolonization means in that sense, and what it means for the literature for us in global health, right? Especially if we are clinically trained. This looks very foreign, at least to me. So colonization here, and I will read from the text, is the historical process where a group or a nation kind of exert control over other, so deciding that you will go and take that control through physical occupation, exploitation of resources, and cultural domination. And many of the literature argues about the economic drivers of coloniality as well. And coloniality in that sense goes beyond the historical moment of colonization, and its remnants and its legacies kind of continues and exist and still continue to shape today's structure, ways of knowledge, power hierarchies, and the things that we experience in our institutions. With that, decoloniality is a framework for dismantling the colonial power structures and what is still existing from its basically the residual impact. It also starts to focus more on addressing the systemic inequalities rooted in historical and ongoing colonial practice. And it's really important as we increasingly see more decolonizing global health literature and publications and guidance and toolkits and commitments. But do they actually challenge and how the systems are developed, or do they actually try to beautify them? And to what extent the use of some of these terms have been what they call it, decorative, exactly as you put it, to make a beautiful or a charter or an institution look much beautiful, but in the same time the same structures are still the same. And these are fundamentally very different from equity, diversity, and inclusion, which are often procedural and very institutional focused, or anti-racism, which focus more about the racial part and dismantling racial hierarchies. And also the justice, which is more about fairness and across society and a broader structure, but they don't not necessarily engage with that much of depth with decoloniality. But what it means really for us in terms of methods. So Abimbola wrote this incredible book called The Foreign Gaze, and in that book he unpacks a lot of issues about how justice and how coloniality has been materialized in our understanding and teaching and the way we conduct as well research and evaluations. So he defines here the foreign gaze as a perspective where global health challenges are viewed, addressed through the lens of external and often Western actors. And he highlights why this is really dangerous, especially in the way it materializes in methods and evidence. And I particularly invite you to read his book. It's free and open access, and online you can find it. I'm really fond in particular with chapters, I think 3, that discusses evidence as cliché and tries to unpack how this kind of perception defines a lot of issues such as, and methods that we use, particularly randomized controlled trial, in inaccurate way. With that, he argues that the foreign gaze is not only unfair or unequitable, but it's also methodologically wrong. And with that, our call is to change the way we do research and teaching and understanding of knowledge, not only because they are better for us as human beings in an equitable way, but it's also because this is the closest we get to a good research and good science. And the optimal way here is to obtain good science, yeah? He engaged with multiple issues, including, whose voice matters, whose gaze matters, whose way of perceiving and understanding knowledge matters, and what the implications of that, including the marginalization of local knowledge and context, including who is perceived as an expert. Is it a person who have been working in that context? Are these the community working in this context and living these? Or is it the lived reality of a particular issue? And to what extent these should be integrated in our research as well? We tried to join, to draw this, and we wrote a call. Yeah, we call it a call, yeah, for expanding and understanding the limitation of the existing methodological toolkit that we're experiencing and we're working with at the moment. This is not a call to exclude one or to remove one. It's more about understanding and acknowledging that there are way more ways to do things and way more ways to start working with Indigenous and decolonial approaches. And I think with that, this was the start of my work with the Center for Evaluation, where we wanted to unpack and build on the work we did before for the Humanitarian Center to particularly focus on first understanding what decolonial methods mean, yeah, and how we can navigate them and maybe understand the roadmap or a way to navigate our way to that. And the most important is to avoid superficial or incorrect application or conflation of the different terms used in this literature. And with that, we started a series of activities, including this scoping review of decolonial and Indigenous methodologies. And we developed this typology. And the typology here classifies the literature into 2 main directions. The first is the type of the literature that aims at deconstructing the colonial methodologies. So understanding why some of the Western methods that we use, including randomized controlled trials and how they are applied at the moment, and the obsession with issues such as generalizability, they come from a very colonial origin. Issues, if you look at issues such as scoping reviews that are very extractive. Extractivism is a colonial language, and that was developed with a very colonial intention, yeah? And I know that we look at these as a everyday method. We don't usually stop and reflect on where they came from or why we're using that, why we're not using data analysis instead of extracting, because it's very interesting way. But also it's important to ask, are these terms important? Arguably, we say yes, yeah? The other part of the literature was trying to first, they are both parallel, yeah, so they are not in series in that sense. The other part of the literature tries to engage with like reconstructing of decolonial and indigenous methodologies, or offering alternative, you know, if you would like to deviate from that, or if you would like to complement and use multiple frameworks, what a decolonial and indigenous method would look like. And with that, we try to group and map the existing methodologies and try to put them into 4 categories. And we spent so much time here trying to see what would be the most appropriate category. And we here fully acknowledge 3 things. First, it's never linear, yeah? So this linear is a kind of oversimplification of the existing methodologies. Second, multiple methodologies can be both decolonial and indigenous, so they can fit in multiple categories at the same time. The third and the most important, the logic behind categorizing these methodologies. And we decided that it will be according to the degree of transformation, yeah, versus a degree of adaptation.
Sali, sorry, we can't hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Now it's good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I wonder if, I think I'm connected from my phone with the audio. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, going back to our discussion. So with that, we developed these 4 kind of typology or categories, including the culturally sensitive approaches, participatory, decolonial, and indigenous. And they are both kind of based on very different principles, depending on to what extent the researchers or the evaluators or the team conducting this kind of work are willing to change the way they perceive things and reorient their research and evaluation in a political and philosophical and epistemological direction, yeah? And with the first left side towards adaptation, you will see the culturally sensitive approaches that are willing to do minimal kind of adjustment to the existing methods or instruments or tools, to use more of maybe locally sensitive terminologies, more of like acknowledge a few preference of the community that they are searched. So look, an example of that would be testing a focus group discussion tool with some of the communities, changing some of the words that are used, changing the orientation of some of the questions or the flow of the questions, understanding what's sensitive to be asked in that context or not. So in that sense, you're doing minimal adaptation, yeah? After that, you will have the participatory category, where you will do a more of collaborative approach, and you kind of engaging more with the community members and also local researchers in more of co-creating and kind of and co-designing. So they might be more engagement and more role for these communities and researchers in designing the study, the tool, sometimes the questions. If you're doing full-fledged co-productions, they are actually doing everything with you from the beginning. So that's also the second kind of towards the transformation. In a more transformative direction, we have the decolonial, and at the heart of the decolonials comes the dismantling the empirical episteme, the way that epistemologies have been developed from the perspective of the empire, and in most cases it will be Western empires, and reconstructing power imbalance. So they kind of trying to even change the way that the research team has been set, who defines the questions, who have the power to define questions, and they are mainly focused on issues such as liberation and decoloniality, and really focused about power, And power here is really important, because we will come back again to this point when we discuss particular ways to implement. For example, what would make yarning circles not a traditional focus group discussions is the attention to these issues and understanding how you can see power, And most transformative, as we see it, is the indigenous approaches, in that they are kind of rooted in political assertion of sovereignty and self-determination of the indigenous communities, and how we can center the indigenous way of being and knowing and feeling in the way we design research methods and plan for our outcomes as well. Yeah. I'm just checking the time. I don't want to be a little bit over time. I will go a little bit and share a few examples of indigenous methodologies in particular, but very happy to share a few other examples if you would be keen. But I feel that the indigenous part is the one that is least explored in this literature, and I want to say that in our search project, we were really limited by how little we know in global field. More work has been done in this in international development, in education and political science. So this is a very evolving area of work. So just to say why we're particularly focusing on indigenous. So there are a few literature. What was quite interesting is that many of the literature that we found were actually coming from settler colonial context, including indigenous approaches, particularly from New Zealand and from Australia and Canada and United States, from the Aboriginal communities there. To our surprise, it was very hard to find indigenous methodologies documented and were available in English from Africa, from South America, from different West Africa as well. In India, we expected to see ways more of that, but that was also one of the limitations. But also, I have to fully acknowledge how colonial of me to conduct this in colonial language, such as the English, and this is something we write and engage with. Yeah. If we would to do this work differently, we would have definitely expanded the team. We would have worked with people with multiple language and who can speak multiple language and can do this search in multiple other forms. We would have searched not only the written literature, particularly peer-reviewed papers and books, but also we would have expanded that to the videos and audio content that many communities still favor to keep their knowledge as tacit or as non-written and verbal to that. So this is also a little bit of our learning as we try to learn as well how to practice decolonial inquiry. Okay, going back to some of the examples that we identified, a very prominent one in this field was the Indigenous evaluation framework that attempts to recenter evaluation practice within the Indigenous worldview, how they see things, how they practice things, and how their sense of being. And there are a few values that kind of govern that. But one of the very important things were issues such as land and culture and way of being relational and being place-based, which is, I think, a very particular characteristic for the indigenous evaluations. And we have seen this a little bit less in the colonial one. And here we're focusing more on evaluation because that was the more scope of this work, but we argue that is applicable to implementation science, and different ways of doing research as well. So sorry, I should have said that at the start. So among the values that shape this framework is the issue about people of a place and how to center the place and sovereignty of the people on the place when we're conducting the evaluation and understanding how they see themselves and fit in this place. There's also a lot of discussion about sovereignty, including affirming individual sovereignty, but also collective sovereignty of the community and what that means in terms of how we practice research. While many will say that this is a very common thing and it's practiced everywhere, right? It's not, it shouldn't be only to indigenous, it should be in doing good research anywhere. A few particular issues, particularly in relation to the data and data governance, they are very particular about that, particularly about how they use I don't want to go too many details, but who would have owned the data. And one of the key criteria and principles here that the community and the people who are engaged in this research or evaluation should be the ones who own the data and also own the findings of the data. That means it has to be disseminated with them. It has to be, the findings have to be embedded. In fact, an Indigenous way of doing evaluation should embed the evaluator inside the program implementation, and that's why they resist a lot of external appointment of evaluators, which is the model that we see in international development. So in practice, they are very different. There are also a lot of work that have been done by Professor Maggie Walter and a collective of scholars in Australia about Indigenous data sovereignty framework, which discuss a lot how the data governance for research in particular should be governed with Indigenous principle and frameworks. If you would like to unpack this a little bit more. Research coming from as well Australia and New Zealand. This one is from New Zealand, is the Kaupapa Indigenous Evaluation Framework, which discusses centers integrity, but also has a very particular way of resisting racial capitalism and exploitation as a core component of how they see and frame the evaluations. With that, they try to distance the evaluation design and purpose from the economic and racial capitalism systems that try to exploit the resources, the land, and the communities. There are also some existing and very famous work, particularly from Professor Pajari Chalisa, from working and using the Ubuntu Center paradigms. And as some of you may know, the Ubuntu is African philosophy, and with that they centered a few issues, including humanness, communitarianism, solidarity, and interdependence as core values when developing these issues. But how these can be implemented? I mean, does it call for a different way of doing evaluation and research, or we still can just go and do a traditional interview or focus group discussions? Both can be done. It depends how they would be used and what would be the guiding way of designing that. So the literature also points for particular ways that are used more in Indigenous methodologies, including storytelling and talking circles or culturally created manifestations and proverb-based approaches that are very common using Ubuntu in particular. And there are more increasing literature describing proverb-based evaluations in global health, particularly coming. So we're learning more about how these can be implemented. One of the key issues is that the literature about the learnings from implementing these approaches is still growing, so we're still building capacity on that. As I was saying, power is here centered, and to the extent you're willing to negotiate and give power to the communities and people we work with is the core in what we understand in the practice of decolonial and Indigenous methodologies, including setting the questions, but also practicing the data collection and generation approaches. For example, while some would perceive talking circles like a very traditional focus group discussions, you just sit with the community and try to understand and discuss with them their attitudes, behaviors, and approaches. The way that talking circles kind of fully give the power to the community, and with that being more driven. And some also would argue that it's more relevant to maybe anthropological approaches, but it's also very different from anthropological and ethnography approaches, because it still embeds and presents the researcher or evaluator as part of that, so it's not invisible or not in existence. They're still contributing, and they should share as much as everyone else shares, but they don't control and they don't go with the agenda. With that, issues such as like topic guides or interview kind of topic data collection or set questions might be negotiated and redefined differently. So this is also a very important point to do. So our key message from the work that we have done is try to build more accuracy in using the terms that we should be using in more accurate terms when we're describing the methodologies that we're using in developing and implementing decolonial and indigenous evaluations. I know that the word decolonial and anti-colonial have been becoming more fashionable now, but is it actually that? And I've attended, I've been always reading, when I read like issues such as reading some of the paper recently, and I see that maybe they are culturally sensitive or maybe more participatory at best, but we really need to interrogate the full depth we're willing to do decolonial and indigenous way. An example that I would like to give from my own work is how I was, how many of you have been using conceptual frameworks on access to care, or and how many of these have been developed in context where you're studying. And that's one of the things that I wanted to do, where I've used a particular local concepts of kinship to understand how communities in Kurdistan, Iraq, have been exploring and practicing different forms of agency. When using sexual and reproductive health services, I've been also using a very local framework to unpack the clinical and managerial discretion exercised by service providers in these settings as well. So instead of using the traditional ones, for example, LIVISC framework for access to care, or health system resilience frameworks, it would be very good to try to complement and play around with some of these more indigenous ways of knowing and interpreting things. But also the literature highlights a lot of contested questions. We still have very little understanding, and we try to build scholarship in that. I will mainly focus on two here. First, who should be doing that work, And across the full spectrum, as we now understand that the spectrum is really wide, and some have been saying that there is space for a mix of experiences, including having international evaluators along with local evaluators, but also other set of the literature would say that the practice of true indigenous evaluation should be only done by indigenous scholars as a form of reciprocity, as a form of stating the sovereignty, and they are the ones who will ensure that the findings will be included again. Other parts of the literature as well critique that kind of notion, because assuming that indigenous communities are one homogeneous group, or there is no elitism or no hierarchy and power, is also a naive perspective to that. So there's still a lot of discussions and debate in the literature about who should be doing that kind of work. There's also another part of it that says that it doesn't really matter who you are as long as you're embedded in the community. And with that, they would like to see more evaluators who are embedded in the program evaluations, so they ensure that there's a whole circular flow of knowledge, and then learnings from evaluation or research are more taken up by the program and the delivery of care and services and programs. So there's a lot of still contested areas in that sense. There's also another area of tension here that we still try to unpack, how multiple frameworks should be working together, including the integration of, I don't know, how we can develop Ubuntu-based philosophy, integrate that in developing clinical trial. These are still issues that we still would like to see more experimentation and more exploration and more publication in that. I think I'll stop here. Sorry if it have been a little bit too much, but very happy to share the presentation, share more readings, and discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you, Sali. So now we open to questions, comments. To Sali, please.
If no one wants to talk, I've got one. Well, thank you very much, Sali, for being here with us. My question is, it has to do with methodologies. You've been talking today a lot on implementation and evaluation methodologies, which I think is very easy to come through because they are very comprehensible. But my question is, how do you address things like randomized clinical trials, which had a lot of pressure from whoever is financing them? And how do you run these trials? Because they are very frameworks that are very tight, and how do you? I'm not saying that they are the best, but you have to run through them, otherwise you don't get your work recognized. So how do you deal with it? How do you find new methodologies? How to go on the scientific community explaining that there are other methodologies that could also give you good results or different results or something that you can discuss. But at the moment, there's no discussion on that. It's the way you have to do it, you do it. No discussion if it is the best method, if it's not the best method, if it serves our interests as a global, when I say interest, as a global thing. So do you have any answer? Can you show somewhere to search or somewhere to discuss this sort of issues?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and I think this is one of, like, as a center for evaluation, most of our members are either work with RCTs, or they are, in the process of working with ones, and this is a huge part of the questions that we're having now. We want to develop better understanding in that there are multiple ways to kind of indigenize or decolonize RCTs, including, because the assumptions of design of categories that they are universal is also incorrect, and they are open to interpretation and kind of working with that. Again, it depends where you want to be in the spectrum, if you want to do a little bit of culturally appropriate kind of RCT, or if you want to really transform the way RCTs are developed, And the work of Pajali Chalisi in particular focuses on RCTs and she has, I think, 2 really good papers I'm very happy to share. However, the work in this area is very limited, and we still need to do more work on explaining how that can be done and show good practices and good examples of doing that. So I agree, this needs a little bit more search and more visibility.
Okay.
I think a really important part as well of the work that we've been doing is understand this as a larger umbrella rather than seeing that as a fit to one method rather than other. And because there is this assumption that decolonization can be very easily done in qualitative research, and those who are working with qualitative research, or maybe potentially mixed methods. But there are multiple groups, including a group called, I think, critical racial theory in quantitative research here in the UK, in Oxford, and others who are trying to kind of change this perception that quant is kind of neutral or universal or kind of, used universally. Because, I think there are more work on trying to unpack this and to say what that means in terms of practice.
Thank you.
Can I ask you something, Sali? Because with this kind of approach, do you think that might be a risk to, have extreme possessionalities regarding research, and how we can design and implement collaborative research, for instance, between the so-called global north and global south, with that kind of approach that is very much south-centered and exclusively south-centered. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I think if we had an answer to this at the school, it would have been much better. We've been in much better place. But I really like the question that you said about the positionality and the risk of positionality. Yes, because I feel that this is, again, was the driver of why we did some of this work. Because now a few concepts and a few ways of doing science have been, more fashionable, including decoloniality and decolonizing. We see more risk at people just pretending to do this kind of work rather than actually doing this work. And this is what was the reason behind developing this typology, because that might be also increasing the risk of inappropriate attribution of research and research methodologies to the wrong typologies, because we just, more fashionable and we want to do that. And it's also important to highlight that we need to be more proactive in understanding and looking for research coming from the global south. And I think this is something that we don't do as much, and we need to kind of sit and do that and unpack it. And there are multiple initiatives about decolonizing the curriculum, and I'm part of some of these. And it's again, it goes across a whole spectrum, starting from adding one literature from, I don't know, from Ghana, then you did claim that you decolonized your curriculum. That's a very also, I don't know, maybe on the more culturally sensitive approach of the spectrum that we discussed, but not really transformative. And is it more about adding more people to the research team who are more from these with lived experience of the context or can understand the context? The research says that yes, it has a lot of value, but also there is more risk that those people will still operate in the same mindset and the same approach that the whole system operates in. Yeah, so we need also to unpack this tension as well. While they might bring value and bring different ways of things, to what extent they are able to shift the way that we think about things. There are multiple ways, but I feel a good start would be where you want to do in the spectrum. And it's absolutely fine if you will say that maybe I would like to sit somewhere between culturally appropriate and going a little bit towards the transformating part of the spectrum, or this line. It's absolutely fine. It just at least you will be more realistic of what you would like to do and how that will shape the relationship. If LSHTM would like to decolonize, we envisage that as that we don't basically do more work as leading, funding, researching organization, and our role will be just limited to maybe providing some technical assistance, but we don't shape the research questions, we don't extract and take most of the money and resources existing in research and grants and shift to more power. We have two different institutions in the MRC in Uganda and Gambia, and the school claims that this is as part of our trial to kind of decentralize and decolonize, but again, I do believe that as more decentralization rather than decolonization.
Thank you very much. If we have any more questions or comments?
I have one more last slide. I forgot to show. Maybe if you would like to, if it's possible to share.
Yeah, of course.
So building on all of these things, I think we thought it would be helpful because we also struggle a lot with the starting point, and we developed a reflexive planning guide that at the Center for Evaluation that tries to interrogate and help people when they are, kicking off a new project, even thinking if they should go to this project. And across the whole cycle of evaluation or research, we developed 5 things, like set of reflexive questions that focus about you as a human in part of the research cycle, and also a little bit of a story or a wisdom of how that was like a good way that this phase has been done somewhere, and so you can learn from it or maybe get some inspiration, some resources if you would like to read more and understand more, and some considerations. And here we try to answer some of the questions that you asked about, are we actually the good institution for that? If we see a call for funding or a proposal and we automatically apply, maybe we need to stop and take a step back and ask, is there a better organization that can do that? Are there more, maybe we can be not the lead applicant, maybe we can be more of a support applicant. What exactly are we trying to do? Because it takes a lot of intentionality to give away not only power in shaping knowledge and science, but also resources, And again, we refer to coloniality as an economic project, and with that, the existing structure continues to take some of these extractivism and resource-centered approaches. The guide will be out soon, so I think this is my trying to be to promote it, and we'll be very happy to share with the team and with everyone. And I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback. It will be also public, not only for the center members, but for everyone else. And they have like this kind of stage by stage questions, interrogations, wisdom, and resources. And we've been designing that following some of these principles. So yeah, sort of just, yeah, sharing that.
Yeah, it would be nice for you to share that. And I think that it also is something that we can all reflect on that, because today, I might be able to choose where to apply, but I'm talking about myself. I apply everywhere because if otherwise I don't get money to work. So you are in the middle. I mean, everywhere. It's not everywhere, but most places. So. And
Absolutely.
I think my dilemma is everyone's dilemma. It's not me in particular. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of also discussions about whose the responsibility falls for, and it's also unfair for just individual to bear the consequences of decades of coloniality. So that kind of boundary between the individual responsibility and the institutional. That's why in every single kind of discussion we say it's an institutional responsibility, and it's the responsibility of the institutions. And we iterate that institutions should be doing this work. In fact, some of the literature indicates that some of the early career and junior staff are the ones who kind of pay the price for that, and maybe practice more emotional labor, practice more, and they are more prone to precarious work conditions, and even some examples of how people who investigated this kind of colonial origin in their institutions didn't continue to work in these institutions. So, yeah, I totally agree. It's
yeah, but saying that, I think institutions have their share of to solve the problem, but. When I'm a PI of the project, I should be aware of that. I should do something, everything that is on my power to do. Obviously, there are some things you cannot, but whatever you can do as a principal investigator or as a member, because you don't need to be a principal investigator to share your opinion. If you are in a safe environment, in a healthy environment, working environment, so. You also have your share of responsibility. Don't put it to the funding agency, to the institution.
No, we do. This is why we try to kind of do that with a multi approach. So in the same time, we work very closely with multiple centers as representation of the institution, so they can make commitments how they want to change things, how the center will change the way they teach, kind of work on visiting the curriculums, how they would like to reorganize the way that grants and resources are applied, but also how we see knowledge and whose knowledge is valid in that sense. So think of the structure of, mixed method course or designing public health interventions in middle-income countries, a course that we have. Who's responsible for reviewing that? And should all the literature be focusing from research produced in LSHTM about these organizations or about these contexts? Or, what is their institutional and department responsibilities here? But also, at the same time, we developed this guide that I was just showing, which should be an individual reflexive process that ideally most people in the team would go through to understand and interrogate their position, including their understanding of the context, the knowledge, are they appropriate to this project? Is there more appropriate person? So we also interrogate that. Some of the findings from our research, the one that explored the humanitarian center, were discussing funding decisions and how some of these funding decisions should be discussed not only by the principal investigator as the one that oversees, the overall budget, but also by the finance officer, and they should interrogate these questions as well, because they control some of the small nitty-gritty details about, transfer fees, cost fees, how your partner institution will be covering, bank fees that will be, how much money, or how, if you have particular amount of money allocated for publication, for travel, for conferences, how this will be allocated. Sometimes the principal investigator don't dedicate don't go into this micro level of decisions. So with that, we argue that it should be kind of each one of the team members should be interrogating these sets of questions, because they all exercise power in some sort of way.
Sali, I don't know if you still are going to present something on the your experience of decolonizing teaching and curricula. No,
I'm very happy to present a few, to share a few things, but didn't include it in the presentation at this time. Okay. But I'm very happy to do that.
Okay, no, but I'm if we don't have other questions, I would like very much for you to share some concrete examples. How are you doing that I imagine at London School, decolonizing, teaching? What are you doing concretely? Please, if you can share with us.
Yes. First, I would like to acknowledge my colleagues and the module directors who helped a lot with that. And also I want to highlight that we won Teaching Excellence Award from LSHTM as a module this year for delivering bridging the awarding gap. So it's very good as well to see that this effort has been widely acknowledged by the institution. So I'm particularly sharing an example for a module called Health Policy, Process and Power. It's one of the largest modules in LSHTM, and I've been part of the teaching team for the last 4 years. This module, we have over 200 students every year. It's huge, and we have a lot of people from different backgrounds, including clinicians, including policy analysts, including evaluators, and all sorts of things. And it's a master degree module. Across the years, we kind of observed, particularly in the first 2 years I was part of the team, that there was a difference between the number of students and percentage of students who get 4 or 5. 5 is the highest grade, yeah? This difference was based on language of, like their native language, and based on race, and based on if they are from the UK or not from the UK. Whilst the literature refers to that as the performance gap, we really resist the use of this term because it assumes that some people performing better than others, and we see that as incorrect, but also very racist. So we decided the term that is being used and we align with is the award gap. And with that, we perceive that there is something incorrect in the way that we teach that allows more students more particular type of students to benefit more from the knowledge and the way that we teach rather than others, yeah? Or potentially something about the assessment that we do. So we got a grant from LSHTM, small ADI grant, to unpack this and conduct a little research to understand that. And we developed a research with both the teaching team and the students to understand their journey in going through the module, what support was perceived to be helpful from the module, the assessment process, and how they perceive the assessment process. And we tried to unpack how these journeys were very different for different students, yeah? And based on that, and based also on a scoping review for the best practices for bridging the award gap, we starting to develop a set of interventions that we piloted in the last 2 years. The findings were incredible because the award gap has been bridged for all the ethnic groups, and more people are getting higher grades across all the ethnicities. If they have received their original education in English or in non-English language, and if they are educated in the UK or not in the UK. And the only thing that we had worse outcomes were disability. And I think we attribute that to the way that the school changed the definition of disability. So this is also an important thing to highlight. So that's a great outcome. What were the interventions? Just in a nutshell, they were diversifying the case studies and the material that they were presenting, providing more support, providing more map and visual maps for how students can be planning for their essay, so they know what they expected from them, not rely on other kind of informal resources, and they have basically that kind of social support that more UK students find, international students wouldn't. We try to change a little bit the assessment approach and the assessment questions. We give them a timeline for planning so they will understand how the ideas that they presented in the module would build on the introduction of the assessment and the essay writing process. So they would see that in particular. We know that students have been educated in the UK benefit more from modules that assess them based on essay writing because they're more comfortable in that form of assessment. So we offered additional clinics, 5 clinics where students can come and join and kind of understand. Think of a, I don't know, medical doctor trained somewhere, and this is the first time probably, at least that when I kind of started working in health policy, I wasn't familiar at all with the kind of like writing and crafting and writing well-crafted and well-analyzed and argumentative piece of health policy is something very much dependent on your crafting skills and writing in English. So we felt that there are a lot of things that we should also introduce. So the developing and kind of expanding the essay approach that they can write about any question, including their home country and their home the issues that are more closer to them. So all of these 5 or 6 interventions were kind of resulted in bridging the gap. And I feel it's not only just adding one literature, it's just also understanding the experience of the students and take the data and assess it and learn from them what would be a more conducive learning environment and teaching environment.
Oh, okay, that's cool. Do you have a material on or published this study or?
Yeah, we presented that in the Inclusive Education conference last year in UCL. I think we have the presentation. I'm very happy to share.
Yeah, because it's something as a teacher, I think that's a concern of all of us who teach, because not wanting to use the word wrongly, but that's definitely a gap that I think all of us try to get it smaller, but it's not easy. And me and others, I have lots of preconceived ideas, even if some of them I recognize, others I don't. So it's good to see other people experience and how can we sort of get through this without bridging the gap, because the students, if we don't do it, they are the ones who get less knowledge from our courses. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I feel there are a lot of room to kind of test new ways of doing things and evaluate. So we're also very happy that we can get this data, because this is what we usually were stuck with, how we could, kind of analyze the data by ethnic group, by the language, by the study of the students. I don't know about the data system in different universities, but that was something that, yes, we can get like the module assessment feedback, but how we can link that to the different indicators so we can actually understand if we're making these outcomes better for everyone.
Does anyone want to make a question? Well, either on the chat or personally, yeah. We've got 19 people, so no questions?
Yeah.
Maybe everything was clear. That's why there are no answers.
So I've got another question that might be slightly provocative. How can we send a message to everyone that this is not that this is science, not a religious thought that we want to decolonize like something that is ethereal and religious, but this is actual science, good science. So I think this needs to be explained or to be. So I don't know what your opinion on that. I don't know if you get that sort of comments or feedback from people. Oh, you're just, I don't know. Might be different in UK and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine.
No, we get this question a lot. And I also want to say something. It's again, the way the different people perceive the place of knowledge in their life is very different. And seeing that only from a Western and Euro-centered gaze is also not, there is no definition of science. There is a Western definition of science. We hosted Professor Pajalit Shalisa, who developed the Made in Africa framework in London School. And this webinar is available on our website if you go and look for that. And when she presented the framework and how she sees that, and one of the dimensions that she discussed is the spiritual part, yeah? And that's the part that she got so many questions, because people again couldn't understand the place of spirituality in knowledge and science and evaluation. And again, this is a very Western way of looking at that. So I don't see that arguing for science is excluding other ways of seeing how science can be integrated with other elements. Yeah, it's just acknowledging that there are other ways of seeing things, and this is what's important.
My idea was not to discuss the extent of science. It's how to make people perceive that we're talking science. It doesn't matter how extended it is. Yes, science can have I don't know, all sorts of aspects. Yes. Obviously, I was trained in Portugal, in the UK, so my view on science is very narrowed and to place. Yes, but I think the message needs to be set also to people that think science, there's only one way to science. Yes. Because discussing the extent of science, what is in science, that I think that's it's also included, but that's not the answer for this particular problem or question or concern of most people. And I think it's important that people have a broader or more open-minded view about science. Okay. And I think sometimes the message doesn't get through. Yeah. That was my question. Yeah, we can discuss what science, what it compasses all day long.
Because I honestly don't have an answer for like how do you convince people.
No,
I would like to learn how can you convince people.
You can't really. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If anyone have good thoughts on that, I would love to learn.
Okay, sorry. I feel like I'm doing all the questions. I'm sorry.
No, that's lovely. Thank you for that. I love these questions and how they interrogate our thinking.
So maybe to emphasize that this is the last few minutes to ask your questions or comments, share your comments or insights. You can either unmic your microphones or place it in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Orkan. Okay, I think it would be really good to share some of the resources I've discussed today in the presentation. And yeah, if you have more, thoughts or discussions that you would like to kind of continue, very happy to take that as well forward.
Also taking the opportunity to inform that both the sessions from yesterday and today are being recorded, and they will be made available in the DxHub Academy. So you can revisit the presentations, and after you will also find our contacts in the presentations, and you can email us and contact us in case of any doubts or comments. Thank you.
Yes, I think that will be. Oh, there
We
is.
have one question by Pilar in the chat, Sally. I don't know if you can. It's how are things going on in UK, taking into account the efforts made by the Trump administration to remove or decrease the the ADA efforts.
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I feel that some of these decisions have global impact. Even if the policy in the UK is still in not that much driven to the same place as Trump administration. But the work that the school has been doing have been influenced a lot by the US aid funding cuts and some of the policies that have been changing, and how restrictions on NIH grants and partnerships, existing partnerships, including clinical trials, have been done with institutions in the United States. Many of these have been now on hold or have been, influenced. But the approach and way of delivering has been a little bit still not that much influenced. Also, I want to highlight that there are more. I don't think that it will be there was more causality here or link that we can highlight, but the two networks that I discussed at the start of the discussion, the Decolonizing Global Health and FAIR, were both discontinued at the school because of funding cuts. So we can see that the implications of funding and resources on a lot of these efforts.
Thank you, Sally. I think that this answers many of the questions that we are facing. It's not only it's a global concern, I think, but in a certain way, it highlights the relevance of building new partnerships in this context, also to face the changes that we are and challenges that we are facing in this. A challenging contest of policies.
Thank you.
I give the floor to you, Isabel, again. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's if we don't have any more questions or comments to Sali, it's again thank you very much, Sali, for being here today with us and for excellent presentation and the opportunity to discuss a little bit more about this. It's kind of a challenging issue. I think we are also a tropical medicine institute, so we also need to reflect on these issues. That's our me and Rika and Eric. I'm sure we also agree that we need to discuss this topic. So thank you, Sali. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here yesterday and today. And as Reka mentioned, the sessions will be available later. And if you have any more remaining questions, or if you want to share some thoughts with us, please be free to contact us. And we will be very happy to work together in these topics. Thank you, Sali. Thank you, Enrique and Rika, and of course the DxHub for the opportunity for the organization of this masterclass. Thank you very much. Enrique, I don't know if you want to say something more.
No, I just want to thank Sally for this. Was very nice, and I think it's one of many in the future. Thank you very much, and everyone for being here. After all, it's been very interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Sally, for your valuable contribution, and thank you also, Isabel, Rick, and Enrique, for organizing these very interesting sessions yesterday and today. So yeah, this now brings our session to a close. I want to thank you all the participants for joining us today. and we hope to see you again in the next course.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.